The courtroom smelled like old varnish and the ghost of coffee. When the boy in the navy blazer stood, the judge actually laughed, dry, crackling, the sort of laugh people use when they don't think you can hurt them. "Sit down, son," he said, peering over half-moon glasses. "This isn't a school play." The boy didn't flinch. He slid something from his pocket, a rectangle that winked in the fluorescent light. The bailiff, halfway to grabbing the kid's shoulder, froze when the boy held up a state bar card with a crisp seal. "Respectfully, Your Honor," the boy said, voice steady, "I am counsel for the defendant." The judge's mouth parted. The gallery sucked in air like a single lung. The boy's eyes never left the bench. On maps, Harborview looked like a spill, streets warped around the river's elbow, warehouses craned over docks, and mill stacks fingered the sky with a kind of stubbornness that only old cities know. Ezra Reyes called it home in the way you call a scar part of your skin. You stop noticing it until the light changes. At 9, he learned what a bailiff's shoes sound like, a dry rhythm, rubber soles on institutional tile. He sat on a hard bench with his legs too short to touch the ground, swinging his feet while Judge Alistair Caldwell read numbers and names. Numbers, case numbers, stole the music from words. When Caldwell said, "People versus Diego Reyes," Ezra's father squeezed his hand once, hard, then let go. Everything smelled like paper dust and somebody's cologne. Ezra's mother cried silently, chin tucked to chest. She was gone by the end of that winter, leaving a note that said she couldn't breathe in a world that kept shrinking. Ezra bounced from aunt to foster homes, then, by a streak of luck and a social worker with a soft voice, to Maria Alvarez's orbit. Maria ran La Estrella Community Center in a converted church on Navarro Street. She made arroz con pollo that could make a tired kid feel like Sunday. She enforced homework hour like it was a sacrament, then sent her charges home with a bag of leftovers and a little more spine than they'd walked in with. She was not perfect. She was something better. Present. When Ezra scraped up passing grades and then insisted on more, on dual enrollment classes, on spending nights at the library where the fluorescent lights hummed like electric bees, Maria found the money to keep the laptop working and the bus pass loaded. He read case books like they were novels with high stakes. He underlined dicta, taped terms of art to his wall. He carried a pocket notebook and wrote down every way adults mistook him for less than he was. Puberty didn't bless him with height. At 24, he looked 16, maybe. His face held angles, not beard. His voice failed to boom. Growth hormone deficiency, a pediatrician had said with a gentle shrug. It would explain the threaded bones, the perpetual boyishness that made cashiers ask for ID to sell him cough syrup. He graduated high school at 15, undergrad at 19, JD at 22, and spent 2 years in law clerk purgatory because no one believed a kid-faced applicant could hold a courtroom together. Hart & Bell, a mid-tier criminal defense firm with a new logo and old furniture, hired him as an associate on a bet. Hart laughed at first, then stopped when Ezra's briefs came back from judges with hand-scribbled "good" in the margins. The night the community center burned, the city's sky glowed bruised orange. Ezra smelled it before he knew what it was. Oily, sweet, a breath of plastic. He ran toward Navarro Street the way other people run away. Fire crews were already there, water screaming into stained glass windows that melted into sugar-slick tears. A boy named Dante, 17, rail-thin, quick with a joke, didn't make it out. They carried him on a sheet in a way that made Ezra's chest turn to splinters. By morning, the whisper machinery had started. The fire investigators' early determination, accelerant residue, insurance irregularities. By lunch, Maria was in handcuffs, eyeliner smudged, hair pulled back like she was already planning to get through this day and the next. Ezra met her at arraignment, the cuffs digging into the tender skin of her wrists like punctuation. The charge sheet was an avalanche. Arson. Felony murder. She didn't say, "Am I going to die in prison?" She said, "I'm sorry about the kids." Her eyes behind the glass at central booking were as steady as when she'd scolded him for skipping breakfast. "You're not pleading," Ezra said, even before he had a plan. "We're going to fight." Senior partner Malcolm Hart slid a yellow legal pad across the conference table, wordless. Ezra read the notes. Deal offered by Ad Kincaid, 25 to life if she takes responsibility, and names any accomplices. Names? There were none. Deal? A painted coffin. "Mal," Ezra said. "They're using an initial lab screen and a burned-out breaker box. There's no origin and cause consensus. Rourke is notorious for confirmation bias." Hart leaned back. His tie was always wrong by a quarter inch, like he'd tied it while walking. "The city," Hart said, "wants a body to serve to the grieving. They want speed. And this is important. The DA is up for re-election. If she forces trial, they'll bury her in paper and stories about the kids whose after-school place turned into a coffin. She didn't do it." Hart's eyes softened, then hardened. "Feeling and fact are rented rooms in the same building. You know who taught me that? Judge Caldwell. He'll probably get this. He likes his docket skinny and his decorum thick. Caldwell. The sound of rubber soles." Ezra felt the little boy inside him bristle and stand. "Then we make him listen," he said. He filed appearances that afternoon. People v. Maria Alvarez, Defense Counsel of Record, Ezra A. Reyes, Escorsum. He stapled the photograph of his state bar card to the courtesy copy and walked it to Chambers himself. He saw the clerk's eyebrows lift almost imperceptibly, saw the moment she rehearsed telling the judge that a kid had filed for a murder case. He left before he could watch her decide whether to laugh. That night, a call lit his phone. Naomi Park, a reporter who covered courts with a mix of mischief and monastic respect for transcripts, said, "I'm hearing the developer who's been sniffing around Navarro Street is throwing a fundraising dinner for Kincaid next week. You want me to pretend I didn't hear it?" "Put your ear closer," he said. "Find me where their money meets their appetite." Naomi exhaled. "And you do the law thing. Clean. So I don't have to write it with caveats." Her voice went small. "You know Dante's little sister? She calls Maria Tia. She thinks Maria was making soup for the chess club when the fire started. Their kitchen clock stopped at 7:42. Then we start at 7:42, he said, feeling the seconds settle around him like marbles released from a jar. He scrawled it on his notebook, the same shorthand he used at 9 when he'd written, "Rubber soles, Caldwell, don't forget." He slept for 4 hours, dreamed of water and a flame that spoke in a language he almost understood. By morning, Harborview had a villain. It didn't matter that the evidence wanted time to grow sober. It didn't matter that Maria's checking account could barely lift its head, let alone pay an arsonist. The city wanted a story it recognized. A saint revealed as a sinner. Ezra walked into the story like a soldier who'd figured out too late that the map was wrong. The first week after the arraignment was a mosaic of indignities. The prosecutor's office sent over discovery like it was alms. Pages missing page numbers, photographs without timestamps, a chain of custody form with a coffee ring that turned a 9 into an 8. Ezra stood in the hallway reading the cover letter while Ada Kincaid chatted with a police captain about golf. Kincaid was 38 and polished, the kind of man who had mastered the art of looking stern with his hands in his pockets. He wore a pin with the city seal and a smile that never reached the corners of his eyes. He'd done a stint at a white shoe firm, then come home to Harborview swollen with a zeal for order. He glanced at Ezra and then at Ezra's shoes, which were scuffed in that pattern that says you walk to meetings that other people drive to. "You need a guardian to sign for that?" Kincaid said, chin lifting toward the discovery binder. Ezra didn't look up. Your chain of custody on the accelerant sample starts at the scene with fire investigator Rourke at 8:12 p.m. And then, miracle of miracles, the sample is at the lab at 8:13 p.m. The lab is 15 minutes from Navarro Street, even with a siren. Kincaid's eyes flicked toward the binder. I'll have them correct the typo. We'll stipulate to gravity while we're at it, Ezra said. Since physics appears to be under revision. Kincaid's smile cooled. We've got a dead teenager and soot in the lungs. We've got motive, insurance money. The center was underwater, Mr. Reyes. Maria pays rent with bake sales and grit. There's no policy rich enough to make her light a match in a room with chessboards. Motives aren't always clean. Kincaid leaned in just enough that the hallway's murmur dropped a note. I admire your loyalty. But she doesn't need a crusader who looks like a mascot. She needs an adult who can talk to a jury without making them ask for milk. Ezra took the hit. Let it lodge. He would turn it into something later, when the heat in his chest cooled to a usable flame. Back at the office, Hart stood with one hand braced on the window, watching the river perform its endless bruise-colored slide. The board wants us to advise her to take the deal, he said without turning around. The board can come to Navarro and look those kids in the eyes, Ezra snapped. They can tell them their Tia is going to confess to something she didn't do, so some committee can balance a quarterly report. Hart's voice came out tired. You think I don't know what it means when somebody innocent signs their name to a lie? You think I didn't lose a piece of myself every time Caldwell said, denied, like it was a prayer? He turned then, face naked for a second. This isn't about honor, Ezra. It's about odds. And you're not a magician. You're a lawyer. There's a difference. Then let me do the law, Ezra said, forcing his hands to unclench. We need the utility logs for the center, gas and electric. We need the 911 call audio, all of it. We need the building's maintenance records and the work order for the new breaker box in the kitchen that Maria asked for last month. And I want Rourke's certification history. He's been sanctioned before. If we can paint him as a man with a favorite answer, we can at least keep the jury awake. Hart stared. You think you can cross Rourke? I think I can make him tell the truth, or show the jury the shape of what he avoids. He felt something dangerous break loose in his voice. And I think if we fold, Dante's little sister will grow up believing adults are elaborate mirrors that never reflect her. Hart's gaze held a long time. You're in it now, he said quietly. That's the one rule I can give you. Once you walk into a case like this for real, you don't get to be anybody else until it's done. He looked down at the yellow pad, then back up. I'll be second chair, he said begrudgingly. But you carry it. The early motions hearing came 3 days later. Maria wore county orange like an insult that had to be endured. Ezra woke at 4 and did push-ups on his living room rug until his arms shook. He put on the navy blazer that didn't quite make his shoulders look broad, and the tie that Naomi had once called earnest blue. He ate oatmeal he didn't taste. They walked into Caldwell's courtroom, and the wooden pews gave the sound they give. A long, collective creak. Caldwell still looked like an eagle who'd retired into a robe. White hair smoothed back, a nose like a punctuation mark, hands that liked the gavels they held. Ezra could see his father in the glare of the fluorescent lights, the smallness a man acquires when he is suddenly no longer the subject of his own life. Caldwell scanned the counsel table, found Hart, and then found Ezra, then blinked. Counsel, he said slowly. Are you auditing? The gallery chuckled. Ezra stood. His heart did a hummingbird thing in his neck. No, Your Honor. Ezra Reyes for Ms. Alvarez. Mr. Hart is second chair. Caldwell's mouth did the thing adults' mouths do when they don't know whether to scold or laugh. He chose laugh, the dry, crackling one. Sit down, son. This isn't a school play. The sound in Ezra's ears changed, like the courtroom had been plunged underwater. The old boy in him, the one who'd written Rubber Souls Caldwell in blocky letters, put his hand on Ezra's shoulder, and said, "It's the same hallways, the same smug air. We prepared for this." Ezra slid the bar card from his inner pocket and held it up. The gold seal threw light. The bailiff, a big man with a bigger mustache, stopped mid-step. Caldwell stopped mid-laugh. Silence arrived like a new weather system. Ezra felt his voice balance on the edge of his teeth. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I am counsel for the defendant, admitted to practice in this state. Bar number 93604. Naomi was in the second row. He felt her gaze like a lighthouse beam. Caldwell cleared his throat, perhaps to make room for the part of him that was not an eagle but a man. "Very well," he said. "Proceed." It would have been enough if the only battle that morning had been over decorum. But the first motion, Kincaid's to admit the lab's preliminary accelerant screen, was a brick aimed at the foundation. "The science is not science," Ezra argued, careful not to let anger turn his consonants into weapons. "It's a presumptive test designed to direct more rigorous analysis. They want the jury to hear the word gasoline without the burden of proof that the proper analysis would require." Kincaid managed to look pained and superior simultaneously. "The jury can hear what the lab heard. The jury can hear what the law allows," Ezra said. He could feel the oxygen in the room paying attention. Caldwell steepled his fingers. "Mr. Reyes, can you cite for me the controlling case on this point?" He could. He did. He cited it, and two adjacent ones that formed a little family of meaning. He felt his voice steady, as if the words themselves were handrails on a staircase he knew by muscle memory. Caldwell made them argue it twice more, in slightly different shapes, like a craftsman tapping a joint to see if it would sing or crack. Then he ruled, "The preliminary screen will not be admitted absent the confirmatory analysis. If the people wish to complete that analysis, they may do so with appropriate notice to defense." Ezra did not allow himself the small friction of a smile. He looked at Maria. She did not smile either. Her shoulders simply inflated a centimeter, then held. Outside in the hallway, Kincaid fell into step beside him. "Nice recital," he said, as if Ezra had sung, not argued. "Would have been prettier coming from heart." "Maybe," Ezra said. "But then you wouldn't remember it. You'll remember me." Kincaid's jaw shifted once, a tick of a man who'd learned to swallow certain words. "Just don't embarrass yourself when it's a real witness instead of a real-time lab printout." The real witness arrived in a dark suit and the creases of a man who believed starch could make truth. Fire investigator Thomas Rourke had 3 decades in the department and a file that had survived a censure for overstating certainty in cause determinations. On the stand, he spoke in short declaratives that made jurors' pens move without their brains. "We found pore patterns consistent with accelerant use," he said. "We located a V pattern on the kitchen wall consistent with a low-origin ignition point." Ezra rose for cross. The boy body felt like an ill-fitting suit around the mind that had rehearsed this 100 times against an imaginary opponent in his living room. "Mr. Rourke," he began, "you were first on scene from the fire marshal's office." "That's right." "You arrived at, your report says, 7:58 p.m., correct?" "Correct." "And you wrote the report that introduced the phrase, pore patterns." "Yes." "You also wrote a report in 2016 using the same phrase, later withdrawn when the International Association of Arson Investigators updated its guide to emphasize that so-called pore patterns can be caused by post-flashover burning and the movement of water across a floor. Is that fair?" Rourke's mouth tightened. "We evolve. I evolved. Science evolves. Humans sometimes catch up." Ezra let the silence grow a hair. "You've been disciplined for overstating certainty in the past." "Objection," Kincaid snapped. "Relevance." "Sustained," Caldwell said, but softly, like a man who knew where the line was and didn't mind if it brushed his cuffs. Ezra pivoted. "Let's talk electricity. You noted arcing in the breaker box." "Correct. Arcing can indicate energized conductors encountering heat, yes?" Yes. It can also be a symptom rather than a cause. Sometimes. You didn't examine the utility logs to correlate draw and fault timing. It's not my job to pull logs, but it is your job to rule out accidental causes before you call a fire incendiary. Your manual says so. Ezra slid the manual forward with a tabbed page. You skipped a step because you liked the shape of the answer you found. Rourke looked to Caldwell like a boy looks to a father who might call a time-out. Caldwell did not rescue him. Ezra felt a fierce ache for 9-year-old him, the boy who had sat inert while men decided the shape of his life. This, here, felt like a small righting of a small tilt. By day's end, Caldwell denied Kincaid's motion to remand without bail, but set it so high the word freedom felt more like permits supervised breath. Maria squeezed Ezra's hand before deputies led her away. "You did good," she whispered, voice cracking on the last consonant. You made him listen. He watched the orange of her jumpsuit recede like a traffic cone in fog. His phone buzzed. Naomi. A text with a screenshot. A fundraising invite for Council Member Gideon Pruitt, who had spent the past year talking about revitalizing blight. The venue was a restaurant with white tablecloths and a wine list that performed like a symphony. Host committee included. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Judge Alistair Caldwell, honorary chair. He stared at the name until the letters blurred. A sound in his chest changed, like ice cracking. He had an early betrayal to name. Not the judge's laugh, not the city's appetite for a clean villain, but something more precise. A hand extended under a table only certain people got to sit at. He tucked the phone away and wrote another note in his pocketbook. Find Pruitt's land map. Cross-check with Navarro. Then he wrote in smaller letters. Hart, stay awake. The law library on the 4th floor of the courthouse was too cold year-round. The HVAC rattled like an old man clearing his throat, and the low hum of the fluorescent canopy made urgency feel narcotic. Ezra worked there because the white noise leveled the field in his head. It deadened the storylines that tried to cut in line and made room for the one that mattered. Facts that could be proven. Utility logs. He needed electricity, and gas, like other lawyers, needed character witnesses. He filled out a subpoena request and braced for the clerk's sigh, which came like weather. You're getting ambitious, she said, eyes sweeping his face for the tell that would say he was a kid playing lawyer. She found nothing she could use. While the subpoena wound its way through the slow machine of process, Ezra walked Navarro Street with Naomi. The center was a carcass behind police tape. The roses by the alley had not gotten the memo and kept blooming angrily, petals like spilled velvet. The kids say Dante was in the kitchen with Alfredo on the old stove at 7:40, Naomi said, flipping through her notebook. They were warming empanadas for the chess club because someone left the warmer unplugged. The first call to 911, Ezra said, 7:46, from a neighbor who saw flickering light in the window. She put a strand of hair behind her ear. The landlord? Corp LLC owned by a trust. Guess who the trustee is? He let the pause do some work. Pruitt's sister, Naomi whistled. We're going to say allegedly a lot. We're going to say probative. He crouched by the alley door, eyeing the scorched metal. They'll argue accelerant because that theory buys them headlines. I want a fan in the utility room and a breaker box that was crying for mercy. Rourke's report nodded at the breaker box and then bowed to gasoline, Naomi said. Can you get someone who doesn't worship the same God? I'm talking to an origin and cause guy out of state who trains investigators to undo bad habits, Ezra said. He'll cost more than my blazer. Leave the money to me. She said it lightly, and he didn't ask if me meant the paper or her own overdrafted hope. Naomi played fair with facts and loose with her bank account. She believed there was a debt the city owed to truth, and that she could pay down interest with words. Back at the office, Hart called him in. The blinds were down, slats throwing prison bar shadows on the carpet. The look on Hart's face rearranged Ezra's heart. Pity plus something corrosive. "We have to talk," Hart said. "About the fundraiser?" "What fundraiser?" "Caldwell and Pruitt wine and dining each other while the city pretends it doesn't mind the taste." Ezra watched Hart flinch. "Tell me you didn't know." Hart rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't know." He let the uncertainty hang. "Kincaid called me this morning. He hinted strongly that if we swapped you out and put Bell on first chair, he'd revisit the plea at 20. 10 years for a confession to murder she didn't commit. It's not murder in the offer, it's arson. Counts reduced. She could be out in 5. In 5 years, Dante's little sister will be 21. You want to tell her why her tia called herself a criminal to make paperwork stop yelling?" Hart's temper, which rarely showed, flared. "You think I like this? You think I don't see myself in you and hate it? I don't sleep. I dream in footnotes. I hear Caldwell denying bail in my cereal." He exhaled like it hurt. "I told Kincaid we're not swapping you out." Ezra blinked. "You told him that?" "I told him that." Hart's mouth did a small, ruined smile. "You think I kept you on this because I couldn't find the keys to throw you under a bus?" "No. I kept you on because you're the only one in this office who still knows how to aim." Relief made Ezra stupid for a second. He swallowed it down. "Then gird your loins," he said, "because we're about to ask for a thing Caldwell doesn't want to give." The thing was a Brady order, a directive that the prosecution turn over material exculpatory evidence, including deals with witnesses or any evidence that could impeach them. Ezra stood before Caldwell and asked for a universe. Caldwell looked down over his glasses like a man reading weather patterns. "Mr. Reyes," Caldwell said, "the court is already aware of its Brady obligations. I don't need a lecture on my duties from—" He stopped himself short of saying, "a child." He did not need Naomi, who sat in the gallery with her pen poised to make his words famous. "Respectfully," Ezra said, "we have reason to believe there are communications between the fire marshal's office and Councilmember Pruitt's team regarding code enforcement at the center. We also have reason to believe Investigator Rourke received consideration for revising his report to strengthen the incendiary conclusion." He let the words stand like buildings. "If the people have evidence of pressure to make this a quick conviction, we need it now, not on appeal." Kincaid's smile looked expensive and brittle. "Conspiracy thinking is not a defense, Your Honor. There is no evidence any elected official directed an investigation, and if the defense wants to threaten public servants in open court with innuendo, we'll happily litigate a protective order." Caldwell pinched the bridge of his nose as if a vice were turning. He surprised everyone, including himself by the look of him, by saying, "The court will review, in camera, any communications between the fire marshal's office and Councilmember Pruitt or his staff related to La Estrella Community Center in the 6 months preceding the fire." He looked at Ezra. "If there is anything material to the defense, it will be disclosed." A beat of silence. Then Kincaid nodded with the grace of a man who knew how to lose without looking like he'd learned something. On the courthouse steps, Naomi tugged Ezra's sleeve. "Your utilities guy called," she said. "He wants you to check the smart meter logs for a pattern." Ezra pulled the email on his phone. The expert, Dr. Owen Travers, had attached a graph drawn with a mouse and irritation. The electric draw spiked at 7:28, and then flatlined abruptly at 7:41. The gas flow showed a surge at 7:39 and a drop at 7:42, exactly when the kitchen clock stopped. "Power surged," Ezra said, thinking aloud. "Breaker box arced under load, then cut. Gas stove on, gas flow spikes. Something ignites in a pocket where vapors concentrate. Cheapest story is accelerant, but you don't need it if an overloaded circuit creates a hot spot behind a bad outlet. And if the outlet was due for replacement and the landlord delayed?" Naomi's eyes glittered like someone had turned the city's focus knob. "That's not just negligence, That's an entire chain of adults choosing not to do their jobs. He felt his mind click like a gear meeting a gear. Get me the work order Maria submitted. Find the maintenance guy. Find me dates, and... He hesitated, then decided to hurt the person he had to hurt. Check Hart's phone logs. See if Kincaid's number pops up more than once. I believe him. I do. But belief is a bad flashlight unless you test the batteries. Naomi's mouth twisted. You're going to hate me if I find something. I'll hate myself if I ask you not to look. They split. Ezra headed for La Estrella's back office, now a smoky, waterlogged cave. He wore latex gloves and a mask, and moved through ash that had the texture of stale pastry. He found the maintenance file cabinet welded shut by heat. He brought a pry bar the size of a promise and opened it with a groan. Inside, paper had become a layered cake of carbon. He peeled at it delicately, photographing every fragment like it was a dying man's last word. There, the corner of a work order with an initial and a date. 2 weeks before the fire. Replace breaker, kitchen, sparks. His mouth went dry. The maintenance company's phone number, a faint ghost line, was on the bottom. He dialed with ash on his fingers. A woman answered, Klein & Sons. Ezra Reyes, Counsel for La Estrella Community Center. I need to speak to whichever technician went out to Navarro Street 2 weeks ago for a breaker box issue. A pause. That would be Manny. When can I talk to him? Whenever you find him, she said, sighing. He hasn't shown up for work in 5 days. Did he quit, get fired? Neither, she said. He just stopped coming. That's not like Manny. Ezra wrote the name, the word missing, and felt the world tilt a degree. Missing, like evidence. Missing, like decency. Missing, like breath. He thanked her and hung up. Standing in the wet ruin of a place that had taught him the difference between help and rescue. He felt the old animal inside him stretch. This was going to get uglier before it got clean. That night, someone slipped an envelope under his apartment door. No name. Inside, a photograph of Manny, squinting in sunlight, and a post-it with an address. Below it, in jittery block letters that dragged like a bad dream. Don't dig. Dirt falls. He didn't sleep. He arranged notes on the floor until the floor looked like a detective story had exploded, and the shards had decided to make a map. Somewhere around 3 a.m, his eyes landed on a small square of paper half hidden under a legal pad. Naomi's screenshot of the fundraiser invite. Caldwell's name. He tasted metal. Brady and camera, he whispered to the ceiling. And then we see what you hide with your fork and knife. The address on the post-it led to a cinder-block apartment building made of fatigue. Ezra went in daylight, hands empty, wearing a smile that said church bake sale instead of lawyer. The hallway smelled like overcooked onions and detergent. A radio murmured a song from somebody's childhood. He knocked on 3B. The woman who opened the door had eyes that said she had learned how to make men sorry. Manny's not here, she said. No greeting, just a border drawn. I'm not here to hurt him, Ezra said. I'm here to stop a machine that chews up people like him, and like Maria. I'm not the police and I'm not the city. I'm just a nuisance with a bar card. She assessed him. He let her. You look like a boy, she said. I look like the mistake a lot of people make right before I take their favorite assumption away. A corner of her mouth almost smiled. She let him in. Manny sat on a couch, elbow on knee, head in hand. His eyes were red in that deep way that means the hurt is older than the day. He looked up, startled, and then angry. No lawyers. No cops either, Ezra said, staying by the door. Just questions nobody else cared enough to ask. Manny's girlfriend. Tess, she offered, folded her arms. He's been scared since they told him not to talk. Who told you not to talk? Ezra asked. Manny rubbed his face. 2 guys from maintenance company came by after the fire. Not my boss. New suits. Said they were helping the landlord's insurer. Asked if I'd finished the breaker box work. I told them I put in a ticket for parts, and the company said to delay because rent was late. They said if I said that in court, I'd lose my job. He laughed a small, broken laugh. Joke's on them. I already lost it. Ezra's pen hovered. Did you sign anything? They handed me a paper and said it was a routine incident memo. I didn't sign. He looked almost ashamed. I can read the part where it says, "Shut up." Good. Ezra's heart hammered in the doorway of his throat. Do you have the part order? A copy? Manny nodded toward the kitchen. Tess brought a folder with grease on the tab. Inside, the work order, a text printout from Manny to his boss. Kitchen breaker scary, sparks, asked to delay, unsafe. And a reply. Not our problem. Landlord needs to pay. Can I take copies? You can take my whole heart if it means Maria doesn't die in there, Manny said, voice shaking. She fed my niece when her mom was in the hospital. They want her because she's the one who stays. Ezra looked at Tess. You said 2 guys. Did they give names? Just, we're with the insurer. The taller one had a ring with a signet. Fancy. He smelled like a car you can't afford. On the bus back, Ezra replayed the image of a signet ring and placed it on a hand at a fundraiser table. Pruitt wore one. The newspapers called it Old Family. Ezra called it brass that buys deference. He arrived at the office to find Hart in a meeting with a man Ezra had been trying not to think about. Councilmember Gideon Pruitt himself. Pruitt's smile was real estate. It occupied whatever it wanted. He wore a suit that fit like it had been poured on, and a pocket square that performed confidence. Mr. Reyes, Pruitt said, turning as if the air had announced Ezra. I've heard so much. Same, Ezra said. He stayed in the doorway. He did not offer his hand. Hart's eyes flickered between them with the anxiety of a man watching 2 tides approach. Councilmember Pruitt stopped by to offer condolences, Pruitt interrupted smoothly. We all lose when community centers catch fire. Some of us lose more than others, Ezra said. Some of us lose rent. Some of us lose children. Pruitt didn't bristle. It was not his style. I wanted to make sure your firm wasn't allowing your young associate to damage your relationship with the city, he said to Hart. You have many clients who need permits and goodwill. It would be a shame if they found doors a little heavier. There it was. Not a threat, so much as a weather forecast delivered by the man who built the clouds. Hart's jaw moved once. Ezra felt the betrayal arrive before it had fully formed. We don't trade clients for people, he said, and we don't trade Ms. Alvarez for your project. Pruitt turned his full face to Ezra then, the way a predator finally shows interest in the prey that won't run. You're earnest, he said. It reads, you'll do well at legal aid when this burns you out. Before you go, Ezra said, calm, what's it like being trustee for the LLC that owns 1124 Navarro? Pruitt's eyes didn't move, but the temperature did. Hart closed his eyes briefly, as if he could force himself into a timeline where this conversation was a fable. I have no comment on real estate matters, Pruitt said, smile reinstalled. I'm here as a concerned citizen and a cheerleader for the rule of law. Then cheer, Ezra said. You'll have seats at the next home game. Pruitt left in a fragrance of expensive time. Hart sat down hard. You just put a target on our backs, he said, voice hollow. It was already there, Ezra said. I only pointed to it. That afternoon, Caldwell's chambers called. The in-camera review had produced material items. In court, Caldwell's expression was tight, the muscle in his cheek working like a man chewing glass. The court orders the production of emails between Investigator Rourke and Councilmember Pruitt's office regarding code enforcement priorities, he said, each word reluctantly freed. There are also communications between the fire marshal's office and the landlord's insurer discussing delays in maintenance that may be material. Those will be turned over to the defense under protective order." Kincaid objected perfunctorily. Caldwell overruled him quietly. Back at the office, Ezra read until his eyes fried. The emails showed a pattern. Rourke flagging the center for complaints that weren't actual violations. Pruitt's aide asking for a paper trail that would justify action. The insurer suggesting that documented negligence on tenant's part may mitigate liability exposure. And then Ezra's stomach flipped. The email that rewrote the story. An attachment labeled Mediation Summary, Alvarez Vero City, 2010. He clicked. 10 years ago, Maria had sued the city over a wrongful code enforcement closure that shuttered La Estrella for 6 months. The city settled. The judge who signed the order of settlement? Alistair Caldwell. Ezra sat back. The past assembled itself like a recovered mural. Caldwell had history with Maria's fight against the city's bad habits. Pruitt had a history of seeing Navarro as a parcel instead of a place. Rourke had a history of certainty supplied on demand. And Ezra had a history of learning people's tells by listening to their shoes and their sighs. The twist he felt in his bones, the one no one would want written down. Hart had known pieces and swallowed them. On the last page of the production, a calendar invite sat like a mine. Strategy, Navarro narrative. Attendees, Kincaid, Rourke, Pruitt's aide, and Malcolm Hart. The initials next to Hart's name were pale, but there. Ezra stared. The room rotated a degree. He took the paper to Hart's office, where floor-to-ceiling books watched like mild gods. "I was there," Hart said, before Ezra could ask. "I went to push back. I thought I could temper it. Tell them the city would look better with nuance. I was wrong. They wanted a story, and they wanted me to hear it so I'd deliver the right advice to my client." "You stayed," Ezra said, voice quieter than he knew it could be. "You listened." "I left," Hart snapped, shame raising a color in his face Ezra had not seen. "I left when I realized Kincaid was asking Rourke to frame his report around a conclusion, but I went, and the going stains. I should have told you. I should have told the court." He sagged in his chair. "They told me if I pushed, other clients would suffer, that they'd pull permits, slow things, make my phone a bad place to be." "And you believed them," Ezra said. He wanted to be cruel. He chose a scalpel instead. "Because they've done it before." "I believed them because I watched them do it to your father," Hart said, voice a rasp. "I was first year. I carried boxes. I watched Caldwell bury a man who didn't fit his calendar. I swore I'd never be the man who carried the wrong boxes again. Then He wiped his eyes with his knuckles like a child. "Then I found myself learning the names of my rationalizations." Ezra felt the hurt settle into a shape that could be lifted. "You can fix this." "I can try," Hart said. "You're going to testify," Ezra said, "about that meeting, about the threat, about everything." Hart looked like he might be sick. Then he nodded. "Tell me where to stand." That night, Naomi called. "You're going to want to sit down for this," she said. "I'm already down," he said, looking at the ceiling. "Hit me." "I found something you're going to hate me for finding." She exhaled. "Your father, Diego. There's a sealed file, a memo from the DA's office from back then. It suggests they knew a witness lied about an identification. Caldwell sealed it in the interest of judicial economy." Ezra closed his eyes. The boy in him stood beside the man. He felt both of them shiver. "So the laugh," he said softly, "is just the way the machine clears its throat." "Do you want me to run it?" Naomi asked, voice small. "You run it when the time won't kill the right person," Ezra said. "Right now we need Caldwell to do one decent thing because he wants to sleep again someday." Naomi was quiet. "You think he can?" "I think even eagles get tired of the view," Ezra said. Trial days develop a smell. Stress, starch, coffee that tastes like meetings. The jury filed in and looked like a cross-section of a city's unglamorous arteries. Nurses and plumbers and math teachers and 2 retirees with faces that had no patience left for performance. Kincaid told a story like a man who had spent years practicing the first line in a mirror. She was drowning in bills, and she lit a match. He walked the jury through char patterns as if they were interpretive dance, stopped time at 7:42, and let Dante's photograph bloom on the screen with a sweep of his hand that almost made him human. Ezra stood to give a short opening. He did not try to match thunder with thunder. "We will not ask you to feel less," he said. "We will ask you to look more." He put the breaker box on the screen, the emails by Rourke, the maintenance log that had become a relic. "Fires don't care about elections," he said simply. "They care about physics, and physics doesn't do politics." Rourke took the stand with the assurance of a man who had been the expert in rooms where no one pushed hard. Kincaid led him through a ballet of credentials. Then Ezra rose for cross and approached with his hands visible, as if calming a skittish horse. "Mr. Rourke, when you wrote that the V pattern indicated a low-origin ignition, you omitted mention that the wall's paint chemistry can alter V patterns post-flashover, correct?" Rourke's eye twitched. "Paint can do that. And when you wrote pour patterns, you didn't note that the water used to fight the fire flowed from the kitchen to the hall, through the lowest point in the floor, then out the alley door, where it met oil residue from the ancient fryer that everyone has been complaining about for 3 years. I didn't detail that path, because it would make your pour patterns less persuasive. Objection, argumentative. Sustained." Ezra smiled a little. "Strike that. You were aware that the kitchen had an old breaker box that had arced under load in the past month. I knew there were electrical issues, and you did not obtain the utility logs to see the exact timing of the power surge and gas flow, which would either corroborate or contradict your theory. I expected the lab to— You expected the story to tell itself," Ezra said evenly. "Mr. Rourke, you met with Councilmember Pruitt's aide 2 weeks after the fire. I don't recall the exact date. Would a calendar invite refresh your recollection?" Ezra placed it where the jurors could see. Subject line, Strategy, Navarro narrative. Rourke's mouth parted. Kincaid flicked to his feet. "Objection. This is an attempt to smear a public servant with insinuations." "Overruled," Caldwell said, voice thin. He looked at Rourke. "You will answer." Rourke's shoulders slumped a fraction. "We met to discuss public communication. And in that meeting, did anyone suggest that your report emphasize an incendiary cause to support decisive action?" "I don't—" "Mr. Rourke," Ezra said, switches in his voice, flipping one by one. "Did you or did you not agree to frame uncertainty as certainty because it made a better headline?" Rourke stared. The jurors stared. A clock somewhere kept regular time in a room where hearts didn't. Rourke's voice finally appeared, thready. "I was told the center had become a liability. That's not an answer," Ezra said. "Did you?" "I chose my words strongly." "Strongly," Ezra repeated, tasting the euphemism like something gone bad. "One more thing. Are you aware that the maintenance company instructed the technician to delay work on the breaker box due to non-payment by the landlord's LLC?" Rourke blinked. "No." "And that the landlord's LLC is controlled by Councilmember Pruitt's sister?" Silence assessed the room. Rourke swallowed. "I didn't know." "Knowledge is a habit," Ezra said. "Thank you." The maintenance tech, Manny, followed. He wore his best shirt, and the look of a man who'd been taught to apologize for entering rooms. He told the jury about sparks like tiny suns, about a refusal to authorize immediate repair, about 2 men with suits that didn't fit their mouths telling him to forget what he'd seen. "Did Ms. Alvarez ever tell you to delay repairs?" Ezra asked. "No. She kept asking when I was coming," Manny said, voice cracking. "She worried a lot about the kids." Hart watched from the back row, knees bouncing. He'd already told Ezra he was ready to testify about the meeting, to burn whichever bridges were required. He'd added something else, a confession with edges. his own donation to Pruitt's campaign from 2 years ago, made under pressure from a developer client. Ezra had put the admission in a drawer in his mind, labeled rot that grows in dark. When it was time, Ezra called Hart. Kincaid objected to counsel testifying in his own case. Caldwell allowed it with a limiting instruction and an expression that said he'd warn them to stop the world from spinning if he thought the order would stick. Hart walked to the stand like a man entering a confessional he should have visited sooner. He told the jury about the meeting, the language of narrative, the smooth suggestion that an incendiary label would help move resources. He told them about the warning that firms who made trouble found their other clients in line for arbitrary headaches. Kincaid cross-examined with surgical disdain. "Mr. Hart, you've donated to Councilmember Pruitt yourself, haven't you?" "Yes," Hart said, "once. I regret it now." "You regret it because your young associate thinks you've sinned." "I regret it because I participated in a culture that asks people to put their ethics in escrow." "You remained at the meeting," Kincaid pressed. "You didn't call the press. You didn't call the bar. You didn't even tell your associate." Hart stared at the jury. "I was afraid," he said simply. "Fear makes cowards. I'm trying not to be one." It was not pretty, his admission. It was human. One juror, the math teacher, wrote something and underlined it twice. Ezra then called Dr. Travers. The expert walked the jury through meter logs as if they were weather maps. He drew lines between spikes and drops until a timeline stood like scaffolding. Power surge at 7:28, load spike at 7:40, breaker trip at 7:41, gas interruption at 7:42, ignition moment where concentration met heat without anyone needing to carry a jug. The smell of gasoline, if any, could be explained by melted PVC and cleaning solvents in an old building where fumes had their own ecosystems. "Can you say with reasonable scientific certainty that this fire was not incendiary?" Ezra asked. "I can say with reasonable scientific certainty that the data are inconsistent with a poured accelerant ignition," Travers replied. "And they are far more consistent with an electrical failure igniting combustibles during a gas stove's operation." Kincaid tried to turn Travers into a hired gun. Travers turned the attempt into sawdust. When he stepped down, Ezra felt, for the first time, that the jury had a hand on the same rope he was pulling. Maria took the stand last. She didn't need to. He could have rested on what he had. But he wanted the jury to meet her in the only way that mattered. Wholly. "Why did you start the community center?" Ezra asked her. "Because I got tired of taking casseroles to funerals," she said, voice flat with memory. "Because I wanted tired mothers to have a room where the light stayed on." "Did you set a fire on the night Dante died?" "No," she said simply, eyes on the jury. "I would die before I hurt one of my kids." Kincaid's cross tried to make poverty into motive, debt into malice. Maria refused the translation. "I owe because I feed people," she said. "You want me to say I was desperate? I have been desperate before. I've never thought gasoline was a solution." That night, Ezra walked past Caldwell's chambers by accident and then on purpose. The door was ajar. Inside, Caldwell sat with his robe draped over the chairback in shirt sleeves. He looked like a man who had found his reflection and disliked it. He noticed Ezra and gestured him in with 2 fingers. "You're very good," Caldwell said without preface, "for someone who hasn't had time to become arrogant." "I don't have time for much," Ezra said. "A lot of the people I care about are running out of it." Caldwell's jaw worked. "Your father's case," he said, surprising them both. "I think about it." "I do too," Ezra said, differently. "I made choices," Caldwell said, voice thinned by something heavier than fatigue. "Some because I thought I had to, some because I thought it would keep the machine running so more justice could be done elsewhere." He looked at his hands. "Elsewhere doesn't feed the dead." It was not an apology. It was, perhaps, the closest thing a man like Caldwell could shape without breaking. Ezra decided not to hate him for its insufficiency. "Do the right thing here," he said. "Don't balance Maria's freedom on some scorecard you keep for yourself." Caldwell's eyes lifted. I hear you. In the morning. Closings. Kincaid did what prosecutors do when the facts retreat. He reached for the frame. Accidents don't leave clocks stopped at the exact time guilt wants them to, he said. Accidents don't carry fumes to a boy's lungs. He invoked the sanctity of community and the betrayal of trusted hands, and if the logic didn't hold entirely, the music tried to. Ezra stepped into the well and decided to talk to the jury like a man building a table. Plain, sturdy, without flourish. He walked them through the emails, the maintenance log, the missing repair, the meeting where Story pushed science into a uniform. He didn't raise his voice. He did not ask them to love Maria. He asked them to respect their own capacity for attention. I look like a boy, he said, and the courtroom prickled. So people think they know what I don't know. They think I was born yesterday. I was born in a courtroom like this, watching a man with a robe tell my father he'd have to prove he was human in a world that didn't want to wait. I learned something then. That systems are only hungry for the truth when the truth doesn't cost them anything. He let the words settle. I'm not asking you to have courage that history will write about. I'm asking for the kind of courage that makes you unpopular at family dinners. The kind that says, I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and I won't let you sell me a cleaner story because I'm tired. He finished with the breaker box, the physics, the quiet proof that didn't care for rhetoric. Then he sat, hands trembling in his lap, and waited while the jury went to decide whether the city wanted to heal or to feed itself more lies. They were out for 4 hours, long enough for coffee to taste like regret, long enough for Naomi to squeeze his shoulder hard enough to leave a mark, long enough for Caldwell to stare at the seal on the wall like it might speak Latin at him and unmake him. When the jury filed in, the foreman's hands shook. On the count of arson, she said, voice carefully level, we find the defendant not guilty. The words hit the room and changed its architecture. On the count of felony murder, she continued, we find the defendant not guilty. A sound escaped Maria that sounded like a sob taught to sing. Hart closed his eyes. Ezra put his head down and laughed once, a laugh that had no triumph in it, only relief so sharp it felt like a wound opening to drain. Kincaid folded his papers with decorum. He would run for DA again. He would pivot. He would say he respected the process because men like him know how to tuck defeat into their pocket squares. Caldwell thanked the jury. The words he added were a small rebellion against his own habits. Sometimes, he said, the machine is wrong. It wasn't an apology. It was a record scratch. Maria turned to Ezra as deputies removed the cuffs for the last time. You did good, she said again. But now it was an absolution. He shook his head. You did, he said. You stayed. Freedom isn't a door opening. It's a hallway you have to learn to walk without flinching. Maria walked out into winter light and found a crowd that had taught itself how to rejoice quietly because loud joy draws fire. They hugged her, as if their arms could reknit the time that had been unraveled. Dante's little sister pressed herself into Maria's side and sobbed until she hiccuped. Hart resigned from the firm's management committee and took a teaching job at the community college. I'm going to teach baby lawyers how not to become me, he told Ezra, trying for a joke that didn't quite hold. He testified before the city council about the meeting, and though the council made many of the mouth shapes of concern, a few people in the room actually wrote down the names that mattered. Rourke retired early. He wrote a letter to the paper that made defense lawyers snort and his grown daughter cry. In it, he said he had let speed dress up as certainty. He didn't say the word sorry. He didn't have to. The letter wore it. Pruitt held his fundraiser. Naomi photographed the room from across the street through glass. The light made everyone look like porcelain dolls. The article she wrote didn't accuse, not exactly. It arrayed facts like knives and let readers see their own faces in the silver. Kincaid called Ezra 2 weeks later. "You made your point," he said. "You want to make more points? Come work for me." Ezra laughed. The sound surprised them both. "I want to make fewer careers," he said, "including my own. I want to make fewer broken kids." He took the offer he had invented for himself years ago. He opened a storefront office on Navarro with a mismatched couch and a coffee maker that performed miracles when treated like a friend. He took clients who paid with money, and clients who paid with tamales, and clients who paid with a promise to watch someone else's kid on a day when a mother had to work a double. He wrote on the door, in chalk that had to be reapplied after rain. "We tell the truth even when it's cheap." On a Tuesday with clouds that felt like damp sheets, Caldwell came in. He wore a raincoat that had cost more than Ezra's first car. He held a slim envelope in his long fingers. "I got the memo unsealed," he said without greeting. "Your father's case." Ezra took the envelope. He looked at Caldwell and saw something like surrender in a man who had won his whole life. "Why?" "Because I'm retiring," Caldwell said. "Because I don't want you to go to sleep and see my face and think I never tried to see yours." Ezra nodded. He didn't say, "Thanks." The word would not have covered the cost or the lack. He opened the envelope later, alone, and read the memo that said the witness had lied and that the office had known, and he cried like a boy because he was one and also because he wasn't. Maria rebuilt La Estrella with walls that smelled like fresh paint and coffee. The new breaker box gleamed like a promise. She hung a photograph of Dante by the chess table and a small plaque beneath it that said, "We don't forget, we don't burn." At the opening, Naomi handed Ezra a paper plate with 2 empanadas and said, "You did it." He shook his head. "We turned the wheel a quarter turn." "That's most of it," she said. "The rest is repetition." He watched kids run with their laces untied. He watched a boy pick up a rook and move it with a seriousness that made the room better. He thought about the sound of bailiff's shoes and about a man in a robe who had finally said the machine was wrong. He thought about Hart telling a class full of kids named for saints and baseball players that fear makes cowards. He thought about Pruitt learning, perhaps for the first time, that a signet ring doesn't make gravity obey him. He thought about Dante, about the last breath that had tasted like somebody else's negligence. He took a bite of empanada, and it tasted like mercy. When the city tried again to sell Navarro to a version of itself, it preferred the version with less noise and more boutiques. Maria and Ezra sued. They won a preliminary injunction that slowed the city to the speed of paperwork. In the pauses the injunction created, other people in other neighborhoods found the energy to say the word "no" in a way that made elected officials find their phones heavier. Nothing ended, but something started. They filmed the closing message at a cheap table in Ezra's office because the camera liked rooms that had seen arguments and late-night takeout. Naomi asked him to talk directly to whoever would watch. 1 billion nobodies, 1 million somebodies, the boy versions of men who later forget they were ever afraid. He didn't write it. He didn't rehearse it. He looked into the lens and imagined Caldwell sitting somewhere with his envelope-thin regrets. Imagined Dante's sister learning calculus. Imagined Hart practicing how to say, "I don't know," in front of kids who believed him more for it. "Here's the thing," he said, fingers flat on the table to keep from fidgeting. "People will laugh at you when you look small. Sometimes they'll laugh because they're cruel, and sometimes they'll laugh because they're scared of remembering the time they were small and no one listened. If you're lucky, the laugh will teach you what frequency to speak at, so your voice goes through the wall instead of bouncing off it." He took a breath. The camera caught it, a detail so human that the editor later refused to cut it. If you're ever in a room where the story they're selling is cleaner than the facts, buy the facts. They cost more up front, but they don't come due with interest in your sleep. Ask the stupid question that isn't stupid. Pull the maintenance log. Read the meter. Don't let anyone tell you science votes. He thought of Mariah and said, "Find the people who stay. The ones who hand you a bowl of soup when you come in from the rain and say, "Do your homework, you're smart." Believe them. Build a thing for them. Then stand in the doorway when someone with a ring on his finger decides your thing would look better as a parking lot. His voice went softer. If you've been the person who looked away, who took the meeting and said nothing, who told yourself you'd fix it later, I'm not going to flatter you with absolution, but I am going to tell you the door doesn't lock from the outside. Walk back in, say the thing, put your name on the part where you were wrong. It'll hurt. Then it'll heal something you didn't know was broken. He looked down at his own hands, watched them as if they might answer him, then looked back up. "A judge laughed at me once," he said. "It felt like all the old stairs in my life collapsing at once. Then I showed him a card I had earned with the ugliest parts of my story, and he stopped laughing. Not because I made him feel small, but because the truth has a way of making room for itself when you keep naming it." Later, that same man handed me a file that said my father had been wronged. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't give it. We did something better than that. We put a piece of the truth where it belonged. On the record. He leaned toward the lens, like a boy does when he wants someone to really understand. "You don't get justice," he said. "You practice it, out loud, in rooms where people snicker, in files that don't want to be opened, in kitchens with bad wiring, in meetings where narrative tries to push fact off the table. Practice is ugly and repetitive, and rarely filmed. But every once in a while, when a jury foreman's hands shake and a woman walks free, you'll feel the floor tilt the other way. If you're lucky, you'll be standing next to people who taught you how to stay. If you're luckier, you'll become one of them." He sat back. Naomi didn't say, "Cut." The camera hummed. Outside, Harborview went on being itself. A bruise, a blessing. A place where the river kept running past warehouses that remembered smoke. Ezra reached for his pocket notebook, the one that had followed him from 9 to now, and wrote 3 words he meant to say again and again until his mouth knew them like prayer. "Look more closely,"